Well, Madeleine Fullard is head of the Missing Persons Task Team in the National Prosecuting Authority, and she joins us now. Another commendable effort by your team, Madeleine. Well done.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, for the purposes of clarity, is there anything that particularly distinguishes these Poqo combatants we're talking about today from the rest of the liberation fighters that you had to exhume over the years?
Well, this particular group from Krugersdorp, they were part of a larger PAC branch. And I think the events took place in the wider context of the call from the PAC for a wider uprising. And there was a local security policeman who had been monitoring the activities. And there was a collective decision made, it seems, that he should be killed. And ultimately, he was shot dead on the streets of Munseyville on a Friday evening. And 4 people were arrested, and they were convicted of the murder, and some of them pleaded not guilty in the trial, and they were sentenced to death and they were hanged. And like all the other political prisoners, they were buried in unmarked pauper graves around the cemeteries around Pretoria, and the families did not receive the bodies. You know, once a person was hanged, their body remained the property of the state. It was a kind of a punishment beyond death.
Yes.
And the families did not know for many years where they'd been buried. They were buried within hours of being hanged in coffins manufactured in the prison workshop. And they have lain there since they were hanged. And the families were not able to bury them at a place of their choosing. So that was really the purpose of today. Yeah.
Now let's listen to just one story among the many stories that involve the particular people we're talking about today. Malungelo Boy, my colleague, spoke to one relative, and here's what he had to say.
I was nearly a year by that time, but now, as I grow up, my mother told me, I asked my mother about, who's that on the photo on the wall? So no, that's your uncle. And then this other one, no, that's your father. Where are they? They were killed. Where? At Central Prison. Why? No, they were political members. They were Poqo members. So that I started to ask him to give me a clear history about them. Yeah. What was happening through at that time. Yeah. So he told me, no, they were. My father, he was a sportsman. He was lifting the. He was a sportsman. Yeah, sure. Yeah, and my uncle, he was a musician because he was using a he have a band. He was using a trombone. Yeah. But at the time that they were doing those things of politics, they thought maybe they were busy when they were invited. Yeah. Yeah, they would think, no, this is a band of Munseyville. But at the other side, they were busy discussing their politics issues.
Well, punishment beyond death, as you said, Madeleine, taken even, in fact, further extended to future generations.
Yeah. I mean, we see the impact on the families, that the children grow up not knowing where their father is. And there's often been a veil of secrecy within the family about what really happened during the era of apartheid, when it was dangerous to discuss it. And so today there were a lot of tears, both at the gallows when the families walked through the gallows and at the gravesite itself. In fact, the sister of one of the Poqo members wept copiously. She couldn't stand any longer. The trauma of the memory of what had happened was so overwhelming. Yeah, I think the emotional impact, even after so many decades, is really powerful. Yeah.
Now, in between the hard work you have to do of actually identifying, going to all these like strange places, having to actually put together testimonies of people to with a degree of certainty, be able to have a sense or an idea of where to dig and so on. I'm sure you have often sort of taken a step or two back, you know, and said, is this telling us perhaps something we never knew, or we never knew that it was happening to the extent that it actually has in reality?
You know, certainly with the people who were sentenced to death and hanged, what was devastating for me was to look through some of the trial records and to see that so many of the trials were conducted in Afrikaans. So people were convicted and sentenced to death many times in a language that they would not have understood. And that seems, obviously there would have been translation at moments and so on, but I mean fundamentally the kind of core language of the court was a foreign language. And that appears to be a kind of legacy of the judicial system that is very, very hard and very painful to read in the court records.
Well, I mean, a lot has changed. I mean, in the new South Africa, if we still call, you know, I mean, this democracy 24 years later, new, I suppose, in relative terms. It is, but when you sort of, you know, juxtapose the then reality with what is happening now, where do you think sort of, do you see the actual changes that perhaps the new system has been able to, at the very least, be a lot more humane?
Well, I think it certainly is. And, you know, just to comment on the difference between the past and the present, you know, there's a lot of sort of popular call for the return of the death penalty in South Africa. And I think anybody who actually works with cases of death penalty cases, what you will see overwhelmingly is it's uneducated people from rural areas, usually young black men, who end up going to the gallows. And anybody else who has lawyers gets, you know, manages to get a better deal and so on. So there's a fundamental inequity in the way that the death penalty played out in this country. And I think that calls for the death penalty, I mean, I think of one of our cases, Benjamin Moloisi, an MK cadre who was sentenced to death, and he was hanged in 1985 for the killing of a policeman in Mamelodi. But in fact, the security police knew that he was not the one who had done it, and later amnesty applications by those who had done it. So he was hanged for something he didn't do. So the death penalty is irrevocable, and it's, yeah, so I think that the museum that is being prepared at the moment at the Kgosi Mampuru Correctional Facility, which will eventually be open to the public, is going to be one of the more important museums in the country, and if not the world, to show people how the death penalty was implemented and the kind of highly racialized inequities that it operated with. Yeah.
Quickly, Madeleine, before I'll let you go, if I got the Justice Department spokesperson correctly, this was the first phase. There's still more of these Poqo combatants' graves that you're still going to work on and find and identify more of them.
Yes. There were over 60 Poqo members hanged in the 1960s. And I think we are nearly halfway through working through that group. There are still others from Trofimvaba and other areas in the Eastern Cape, Queenstown, where we are still going to work with those families. They are also buried in pauper graves around Queenstown, but we are making good progress. And it's been a very solid project. It's been a privilege to work with the families. They've been very patient for many years while we worked and prepared to make sure we had the correct graves, the correct information, and so on. But we are getting there.
Well, yeah. Thank you very much for your time and for the great work that your unit and the sister organizations you work with are doing. That was Madeleine Fullard, who is the head of the Missing Persons Task Team in the National Prosecuting Authority.